All right, we are sharing this on our few places, and then we'll be ready. Again, I apologize for a little bit of a hiccup this evening. The computer likes to work when we do our kid class, and then when we swap from kid class to adult class, the last few weeks it's wanting to not cooperate for the adult class. All right, now then, let me verify one thing real quick. There we are there. And verify here. All right, we are live everywhere we're supposed to be live from all indications. So we will go ahead and get started. Appreciate everyone joining with us and being here with us tonight as we continue our study in the book of Genesis. We talked about last week, we ended chapter 47. We talked about Jacob making Joseph swear that he would bury him in the land of his fathers, and he'd take him back home to bury him and to put him there. So we ended that chapter with that, and then we get to chapter 48, and this is again part of the end of Jacob's life, and Jacob begins to talk to his. He begins to bless his children, but before he blesses the sons, he does something very interesting. That's what we're going to look at tonight, because chapter 48 is a very interesting chapter in what Jacob does. So let's get started here in verse 1 of Genesis 48. It says, after this, Joseph was told, behold, your father is ill. So he took with him his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And it was told to Jacob, your son Joseph has come to you. Then Israel summoned his strength and sat up in bed. So what we have here is Joseph is again told that his father is nearing the end of his life. He's nearing the end of his time. We saw that last week, that Joseph had heard this word, and Jacob was being told about this near the end of his father's life. And so Jacob is now closer. Again, we don't know the time frame between chapters 47, 48, and 49, how much time has passed, if a lot of time or not, but we know how people are, especially when they're older at the end of their lives. There can be this time where we're told they're sick, they're ill, they're weak, and we're told that multiple times before they eventually pass from this life. And that's sort of the idea here, is that Jacob is getting closer. Now he's even more closer than was in the last chapter. And Joseph hears word that he's sick, and he takes his two sons with him. The two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. These are the two sons that Jacob had in Egypt. Now, the interesting thing about these two sons is sometimes when we read this, we want to put these two children, these two sons of Joseph, in a young age category. And when I say young age, I mean maybe teenager. We usually think about them as being teenagers, but that's not the case. What we see is probably more likely these two sons were either late teen, if not early 20s, because Joseph and his wife had been married at this point. Again, this is Jacob in Israel or in Egypt for 17 years, the end of his life, we're told. So Jacob's been there for 17 years. And when Jacob arrives, we're told that Manasseh and Ephraim were in the land already. So that puts them at least at 18. And again, depending on how far earlier Joseph had them, most people place Joseph having these two sons during the years of plenty, those 7 years before Jacob would come. And Jacob comes in the second or third year of the famine. So that puts these two young boys, if they happen at in that year of plenty, if they're born that year of plenty, they're anywhere from 20 to 27 years old. So when we talk about these two sons, they're not young children. These are older, younger men, but they're not children at home. And that's going to be important for what we're going to say. Some of this stuff sounds like he's talking to little children, but he's not. He's talking to young men. And so Jacob's told, your son has come to you. Joseph has come to visit you. And then we see at last part of verse 2, Jacob, or Israel, summons his strength. This again reveals Jacob's frailty, reveals his weakness, and he has to summon his strength to sit up in bed. He's gotten older again. This is near the end of his life. You remember the end of his life, I believe it's 147 years old. So we're looking around that age. And you can imagine at 147 years old, how that must have been moving around. And you can just imagine the strength it would take someone that age. People sometimes in their 70s, 80s, that have this kind of strength, or 90s, to have this strength to set up. But you're talking about a man who is 50 years older than that. And you can imagine the state he probably was in physically. But he has this issue, or has he has this strength to set up. And then when he sets up, notice verse 3, he says, Jacob says to Joseph, and Jacob begins this. The apparent thing here is that Joseph came to visit his father, not for a specific reason, but he's going to find out something in these verses that are going to change the scape of Israel's history. Notice what it says, God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me. And he said to me, behold, I will make you fruitful and multiply, and I will make of you a company of peoples, and will give this land to your offspring after you for an everlasting possession. So Jacob begins here by reminding Joseph of what has happened to him, about how God appeared to him in the land of Uz, or the place at Uz, and blessed him. When Jacob flees to Laban that first time, he's remembering that ladder, that staircase into heaven. And he remembers God's promise to him. And this is important because he wants Joseph to know what this promise is, and to know that Jacob is not the only one blessed, but his whole family. And what we're going to see is he's going to give this leadership to Joseph, and he's wanting Joseph to know what God has promised to do for them. And so he reminds that promise of that. We get to verse 5. And now your two sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt are mine, Ephraim and Manasseh. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, as Reuben and Simeon are. Now, then verse 6, and the children that you fathered after them shall be yours. They shall be called by the name of their brothers in their inheritance. So what Jacob does here is Jacob does something very interesting, and this is a recorded encounter to let us know about what happens in the law of Moses. When Israel goes into the promised land, because if you look at the 12 tribes of Israel that go in the promised land, you really don't see a tribe by the name of Joseph. Instead, you see the two half tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. As a matter of fact, when you break it down, there's really 13 tribes when you add in Levi, because Levi doesn't get a land, but he gets cities. But that's for another story later. But what happens here is that Jacob comes to Joseph, and Jacob says that I'm going to take these two children of yours. They're going to be mine. And it's very interesting. He says that they shall be mine as Reuben and Simeon are. Now, there's a lot of things that happen here of this statement, as Reuben and Simeon are. Why does he choose Reuben and Simeon as this comparison, and not Joseph and Benjamin? Why doesn't he say, as your brother and you are? Or one of his other sons? Why does he choose these two? Well, what we're going to find out in this passage is that what Jacob is doing is Jacob is going to take tradition and throw it on its head, because he's going to take the firstborn, the right of the firstborn, away from Reuben, and he's going to give it to Jacob, or Joseph. And what we're seeing here is Joseph is getting this twofold inheritance, meaning that the other sons are given one portion, just as any other family would. Each brother gets his part, but Joseph actually gets two parts. And this was what was given to the firstborn. And we go, what he's about to do in just a few more verses. And so what Jacob does is he tells Joseph, basically, I'm going to take your sons as my sons. They're going to be a part of my family. They're going to be mine, just as Reuben and Simeon are. They're going to be my children. And then he says in verse 6, if you have any other children, and again, there's no indication Joseph ever had any other children, but he says, inherit Ephraim and Manasseh. And so he says your family is going to be divided under these two sons, but still Joseph is going to get a double portion. Again, the double portion that comes to that firstborn, that desired. All right. Sorry about that. I apologize. I just saw internet. Did I get, how far can somebody tell me what verse we were on?
17.
No, 6.
Okay.
No, it's about
7? Okay. All right, good. So I want to make sure I didn't lose too much. I apologize. All right. Is Jacob is saying that he is going to basically take Ephraim and Manasseh as his children, as proxy children for additional children Rachel may have had, and that's why he takes these two on, thus increasing the sons given by Rachel to him to 4. Instead of just Benjamin and Joseph, now he adds by proxy Ephraim and Manasseh. And so this is what Jacob does to Joseph, sort of to tell him what's going on and what he's planning to do. From there, we get to next verse, verse 8. When to me, please, that I may bless. Were dim with age, so that he could not see. So Joseph brought them near him, and he kissed them and embraced them. Now, also a question. He sees his sons and says, and this brings up a lot of questions because Jacob just talked about these two sons. He had to have known these sons. He's seen them before. We'd assume been around them the last 17 years. So why does he ask this question? And the most logical explanation I found for this is not that Jacob has lost his vision and can't necessarily see him, but this is probably a formal procedure, a formal idea of accepting who these sons are, because he's about to adopt them. And that's what most people think, that this is part of an official adoption ceremony type thing. And so he says, who are these? And then you notice that Joseph says, these are my sons, and God has given me here. And then he says, bring them to me that I may bless them. And again, it's very interesting that of the blessing of Jacob's sons, the blessing here starts with Joseph and his two sons, the one that Jacob adopts. And this is, again, that blessing of the firstborn, the typical firstborn. But here Jacob takes that idea and flips it on his head. And we've seen Jacob do that throughout his life. Now, again, we see that Israel was dim, his eyes were dim that he couldn't see. And so I think this is more explanation for what Joseph does next, in that Joseph brings his two sons near him. And again, they kiss him, they embrace him, they acknowledge him, they bow before Jacob for what they're about to receive. And we get to verse 11. In verse 11, and Israel said to Joseph, I never expected to see your face, and behold, with his face of the earth. And Joseph took them both, Ephraim in his right hand toward Israel's left hand, and Manasseh in his left hand toward Israel. Are to Jacob. Then we get to verse 12, and this is what I said earlier about why it's important to know and realize that Ephraim and Manasseh were older kids. Because when it talks about verse 12, Joseph removed them from his knees, is not the idea that Ephraim and Manasseh were sitting on Jacob's knees like some young kid would do, like I do nearly every Wednesday night before class when I hold Austin and let him get up here to see everybody, or Elizabeth. Is not that kind of an image. What this is that they had probably, when they come with his face to the earth. And here Joseph is assuming that position of inferiority, a submission to an authority. And this is very interesting because we can go back a chapter. This is the same way that Jacob approached Joseph when he asked him to swear that he would bury him with his fathers. He wouldn't bury him in the land of Egypt. But here we see Joseph bows before his father, accepting this blessing and accepting what Israel is going to do. And then we notice verse 13. This is why I think verse 10 tells us that Jacob was going bad at sea. Joseph situated where Ephraim, the younger, is on Israel's left hand. That Jacob, so that when Joseph blesses them, he can take the right hand, the hand of power, a symbol of power, of authority, of the strong blessing, and just basically stick his hand straight out and touch Manasseh, and that's Joseph's plan. But if you know this encounter, you know that that's not what Jacob does. And then you notice verse 14, and Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim, who was the younger, and his left hand on the head of Manasseh. Joseph his two sons in the way he expects Israel to bless them. He expects him to give the right hand a blessing, that right powerful blessing to Manasseh, and the lesser blessing to Ephraim, his younger son. But Jacob takes his hand and crosses them and lays them on these two young boys. He blesses his right hand, the hand of mighty blessing upon Ephraim, and the lesser hand upon Manasseh. And he goes on from there in verse 15 to say this. And again, notice he blesses Joseph by blessing these two sons. He says, the Lord, the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life long to this day, the angel has redeemed me from all evil, bless the boys. And in them let my name be carried on in the name of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. So here we have Jacob giving down that we call seed promise, giving that blessing of God taking care of them, of God providing for them, God giving them the great offspring. And present active verbs, meaning they're continuous action. They're things that are happening continually. So when he says God has been my shepherd all my life long, he says that God has been my shepherd when I was younger, and God is still my shepherd. And then he calls God an angel who has redeemed me from all evil. And again, you think about Jacob's life, the significance of angels. We saw that angels ascending and descending to heaven. He saw that angel that wrestled with him on the side of the river that he called God, and that would be some kind of manifestation of God. Interesting to see Jacob because this is where we really see Jacob's faith coming out. And some have said the Hebrew writer in chapter 11, when he talks about Jacob, he mentions more of Jacob's life, of Jacob blessing his sons than it was anything else. So this may have been Jacob's big step by faith, or big step of faith, in that he looks to God to bless his children. And then you notice he says, and in them, talking about the boys, let my name be carried on. In the name of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac. And then again, he blesses on this blessing. Now let them grow into a multitude. Let these children grow and let them develop and let them be great. And then we get to verse 17. And after Israel gets this blessing, we see what Jacob does, or Joseph. In verse 17, when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, it displeased him. And he took his father's hand and moved it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. And Joseph said to his father, not this way, my father. Since this is the firstborn, put your right hand on his head. So what we see here is Joseph sees what his father does. And this has always been interesting to me, is that Joseph is not the firstborn in the birth order anyway. Joseph has blessed himself to get this kind of blessing. But when he sees Jacob blessing the younger son, not the older, Joseph gets mad. The idea of it displeased him. Some have said that is a light translation. That the word used for displeased is the word for angry or mad or evil or wicked. And so the idea is that Joseph, the more way this word is translated in other verses, is more of Joseph is infuriated that his father does this. Even so, that he tries to take his father's hands and swap them. Notice he tries to take his 147-year-old man's hands and move them from one child to the others. And so this shows just what Joseph what is going through Joseph's head. And then you notice when Joseph speaks, he says, not this way. You did it wrong is basically what he's saying, that you put your hand on the lower, the second born, not the firstborn. He says, put your right hand on his head. And again, you see Joseph doing this. And again, some people think, and maybe so, that Jacob or Joseph is acting this way because perhaps he's thinking that Jacob is, again, 147 years old, maybe losing his mind. Maybe he doesn't realize which son is which. And so he wants to make sure he does this right. Because again, remember, just like the story of Jacob and Esau, when a blessing is given, it cannot be revoked. It cannot be changed. Once this is stated, and I think this is very telling of Jacob, that he blesses the younger, not the older, because that's what his life was about. His whole story came about because as the younger born, he was blessed with the firstborn's blessing. Although he had to steal it and deceive to get it, here he gives it to Ephraim. And some have said that there's questions of why he gives it to Ephraim, not Manasseh. And I think we're going to see in just a minute that I think it was revealed to God to him to do it this way. that God showed Jacob what's going to happen. I think this chapter and next chapter reveals that God has shown Jacob the future. Again, I don't know what extent, but God has shown Jacob what's going to happen to his sons. And that's why he's able to bless them like he does. And I'll show you that in the next verse. Verse 19, but his father refused and said, I know my son, I know. He also shall become a people, and he shall be a great. Nevertheless, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his offspring shall become a multitude of nations. So he blessed them that day, saying, by you, Israel will pronounce blessing, saying, God make you as Ephraim and Manasseh. And thus he put Ephraim before Manasseh. So Joseph calls his father out and says, Daddy, you're doing it wrong. You've got the wrong kid. And Jacob says, no, I'm not. He says, I know. Notice that repeating phrase. I know, my son. I know. Jacob is telling his son, making sure Joseph realizes that this is not a mistake. He knows what he's doing. And this is where I say I think God has revealed this to him, because God tells him, or Jacob tells Joseph and his sons, that he shall become a great people. He shall also be, this is talking about Manasseh. He says, but the younger brother shall be greater than he. The younger brother shall be greater, and his offspring shall become a multitude of nations. Now, this is very interesting as well, because this is very reminiscent of the prophecy that Rebekah got about Jacob and Esau. You remember before she gave birth to Jacob and Esau, that Rebekah was told when the two children waged war within her, that the younger shall be greater than the older. The younger shall be more successful, be a greater nation than the young and the older. Very same thing happens here. Now, what's interesting about this is we see just how true this is, because as we progress through the book of Genesis and get into the book of Exodus, and we get into the departure, the Exodus from Egypt in about chapter 18, 19, 20 and following in Exodus, we see the numbers of the Israelites. And here's what's interesting. When we get to those numbers, the people of Joseph, under Joseph's family, is going to be 70,000. There's 70,000 people, 70,000 and some odd people. Of those 70,000, 30,000 are of the tribe of Manasseh. 40,000 are of the tribe of Ephraim. So Ephraim is the bigger tribe. And then not only that, we're going to see something else that happens, is that the one of the great leaders that leads Israel into the promised land, not Moses, but Joshua. Guess what tribe Joshua is from? He's an Ephraimite. And thus a fulfillment of this prophecy by Jacob. And again, I don't think it's a stretch of the word to say that God has revealed this truth to Jacob, that Jacob has known that these two sons are going to be a great number of people, and he's all right. Sorry again. I'm going to assume we got to about the end of the chapter where we were at. I assume everybody was with me. Let me get my screen shared again, so we can do these last two verses. All right. We got to 21, right? You nod your head if we got 20. All right, good. So 21. Then Israel said to Joseph, behold, I'm about to die, but God will be with you and will bring you again to the land of your fathers. Moreover, I've given to you rather than to your brothers one mountain slope that I've took from the hand of the Amorites with my sword and my bow. And so here Jacob ends by telling Joseph, I'm about to die. Again, he said this 2 or 3 times. His time's over. He says, but he again reminds Jacob, or Joseph, is very important, that God will be with you. God will be with you. God will take care of you. And he will bring you again. And it's interesting, it says here, I'll bring you again to the land of your fathers, not the land of Canaan, the land of your fathers, the land that God has promised to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, to his children. He says, God will bring you back. And then when he does, Jacob makes a promise to there's one mountain slope that I took from the hand of the Amorites with my sword and my bow. He speaks of a battle he had with the Amorites, the people in the land of Canaan, and he speaks of a land he took. Again, there's no mention in the book of Genesis of Jacob this mountain slope. Some translate this as the word Shechem. The word in Hebrew is actually the word for Shechem, the city Shechem, but it doesn't necessarily mean the city. Shechem could mean it means literally a shoulder. And so some people think this may be a shoulder or a ridge, or as here, a mountain slope. Again, we're not sure what exactly this land is, but Jacob says that he will give it to Joseph, and that's the land for him. Now, what's interesting about this, some people think this may be Shechem, the city of Shechem, where Levi and Simeon slaughtered that city because of what they did to their sister Dinah. And what's interesting about it is that the city of Shechem, the land where Shechem was, when you look at where Joseph or Joshua divides up the land of Canaan for the 12 tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh both get a portion of that land. I think it's actually in Manasseh, but it's right on the border. The city of Shechem's on the border. That Manasseh shares with Ephraim. So actually Shechem. But it's somewhere around Shechem that Jacob says he had a fight. He had this battle with these Amorites, and he took this land. And again, this land by natural birth order ought to have been Reuben's. But here he says, Joseph, is yours. And what we see in this chapter is we see a very important picture in that Jacob has turned his leadership over to his son Joseph. That son that's next to the youngest son. When you look at the order of birth, Joseph was the next to the youngest besides Benjamin. Getting the blessing of the firstborn when he was not the firstborn. And here he takes that and he doubles that down with both Joseph and with Ephraim. He sees what God is planned. He sees what God has revealed to him, I believe, and he is showing that plan that Joseph's going to lead them. And this is what we sort of see is that in chapter 50, after next week, we'll see that Joseph sort of takes over and leads his family till his death, and until his death is over, and he's the only one that takes charge of everything. And so Jacob blesses him here with that leadership and also with that firstborn, and then he takes that again and flips on his head when he blesses Ephraim.
think you're muted.
Yeah, I am. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me now? Yeah. Saying the land of this is a sign of his children with and blessed them and how this came to be later on. I think we're going to stop right there. As again, I appreciate everyone being here. Apologize about the internet going crazy on me a few times. We're hopefully going to get the newer higher speed internet here soon. So hopefully this won't be an issue in the coming weeks. Anybody got any question or comment on Genesis 48 before we close out for the night? All right, if not, like I said, I appreciate everyone being here. Remember Sunday morning, we'll have our worship at 10 o'clock. We'll be back here on Facebook and YouTube. So you can join us there. I appreciate